Just make sure it pops up. There you go. It says it's recording, so that's good. And then I'll share my screen. I'll just check, Brendan, you can see the screen that I'm sharing.
Yes, I can see that.
Thank you. So, excuse me, as Brendan's explained, Imperago is the new system rather than Vanquish. It is a cloud system. There's no software to install, no software to maintain on site. The only things you maintain is hardware, if you've got hardware, in terms of the clock-in terminals or door access. So it's kind of same but different, I guess, is the easiest thing to say. So we're still doing time and attendance, we're still doing shift management, we're still doing absence management using the Imperago platform. It's just a lot easier. It's easier to build, it's easier to manage, it's easier to use. So the aim today is really to take you through some of the key features without spending too long anywhere, because I know you've all probably got slightly different requirements and I don't want to spend too long on any one area, but it's really just to give you an overview of the types of things that are in the system, reassure you that all the things you've got in Vanquish are still there and some more, and the fact that it is just easier to use. So as you can see, I'm accessing this via a browser. I'm using a Mac, but I'm using Google Chrome. You know, you can access the system anytime, anywhere via a browser, basically. All access into the system is based on permissions. So you can create your own different levels of permissions for people in the business, whether that's employees doing self-service, which is a bit of a departure from most people with Vanquish, having an element of self-service. Whether that's team leaders, supervisors, managers, regional managers, whether that's payroll, HR, finance directors, it's up to you to decide the different levels of access that people can have in the system. And it's probably not true to say there's an unlimited amount of options, but there are many, many, many different iterations of features that you can turn on and off and functions that people can perform. So ultimately, you don't have to have everybody doing the same thing if you don't want to. So I'm going to start with the employee self-service first, because we usually get through that a little bit quicker, and then we can go and look at the manager and admin side of things. So I know most of you have probably not been exposed to employee self-service in Vanquish. There is an element of employee self-service in Vanquish, although most people aren't using it to great effect. And hi, Kevin. We're literally just about to start the demonstration, so I was just doing a quick intro.
No, apologies for being there. Yeah, just being.
That's all right. No worries. You'll catch
That's
up.
fine.
We'll send a video out afterwards, and you'll catch up with a missed bit anyway. It was just
that's it.
Me and Brendan waffling for a bit. So we're just going to start with the employee self-service first, I was saying. And as you can see on there, I'm logging in as Faye. It can be a personal email, private email. We can do things like single sign-on. We can do two-factor authentication. It's up to you to decide how you want to do it. One thing I'll point out, this is just my demonstration database. The system is entirely configurable based on each business's requirements. And when I say entirely configurable, I mean that literally means different shifts, different shift patterns, different rules for payments, different reports that you might want to create, different job role names, different group names. So what we see in my system is just the stuff that I've created for demonstrations. So logging in as Faye. When I log into self-service, I am given a welcome dashboard. So as I said, this is just my system. It says who she is. I've got a job role called job role because it just makes life easy, and an example location or department name. Now, that's all really obvious, you might think. But one of the things we do support, and it might not be relevant to the people on the call today, is we do support the ability for people to have more than one concurrent job role with the organization. And we see that in a number of different verticals. We see it in public sector, but we also see it in things like facilities management, contract cleaning, that type of stuff, where people might have more than one contract with the same employer. And it's just reminding them what job they're logged in with, and they can switch between jobs. At the top, I've got something called an open shift invitation, and that's something that doesn't exist in Vanquish today. This is a feature within Imperago, within the rostering module, where you can push out to employees shifts that need to be covered. Now, this might be that someone's off and you need to cover that person, or it might just be there's some extra shifts. So it's a bit like probably what a lot of people do now, which is going around during the week. If you know you're going to have an increase in demand, you might go around and ask who's available at the weekend, who can cover someone if they've got any annual leave. It's just a way of formalizing that in the system and pushing it out to people should you want to do that. Now, it doesn't have to go out to everybody, and it certainly won't be received by everybody either, again, based on the permissions. At the top, then after that, it says what today's shift is, the time that they're working, the type of shift in this case, when they last clocked in or out. So I've got 10:01, and then these codes here, these are entirely up to you. These are just my examples. I've got some weekly codes and I've got some monthly codes. You can choose to show to your employees any code that is being calculated in the system. And it's a really, really important part of the system, if you're going to do self-service at all, is to show them what they're expecting to get paid for. So unlike Vanquish, this system is constantly recalculating. When you carry out actions in the system, it recalculates. When they come into the system, it's always going to give them the latest information. So in this case, they can see how many basic hours they've done, how many overtime hours they've done, if they've worked at any premium times in a day. In this case, it's for night shifts in my system. But what it means is that if it's not right, then they've got an opportunity to say something before it ever gets to payroll. Most people are using this system for one or both of the following reasons, which is to manage time and attendance in a way to get people paid, or to manage your rosters effectively to meet operational demand, as well as trying to get people paid. So if you can share with them what you're calculating, then they will have a vested interest in looking at that and having an opportunity to say, I don't think that's right, before you ever get to payroll. And we've got case studies where people are using this along with the rest of the system, and the amount of pay queries they get is reduced from hundreds a week down to a handful a week, and their pay accuracy is increasing as well, because people will expect to see what they want to get paid for. Now, as I say, these are just my codes. This would be whatever you want to display to people, and you can display different things to different types of people as well. At the bottom, you can also choose to share with them any exceptions that might be outstanding for them personally. So you can see there where she clocked in but didn't clock out. So that's going to be a classic reason why the hours might be wrong, because there's an incomplete day. And then there's an overtime that was worked on the 12th, which still hasn't been authorized by the manager. So that's going to be another reason why those things aren't showing the values that she expects to see. Now, as managers, as team leaders, as admins, of course, you're going to see these exceptions as well. You're going to see everybody's exceptions that you're responsible for. But Faye's only interested in herself, so you can just display the exceptions about Faye to Faye for her to try and understand what's going on. And as soon as things are resolved, these things disappear. Up here, I've got some annual leave information, excuse me. And we can manage annual leave in the system along with other absence types as well. We can also do things like leave entitlements. We can do length of service increments, that type of thing. So in mine, I've got it set January to December for Faye. You can have different holiday years. You can have multiple holiday years in the same configuration. So if you've got multiple locations that might have different contracts, or you've got old contracts, new contracts with different holiday terms, then you can set those up in the system, apply them to people, and let the system manage that with them. So it's just giving them the information they're interested in, a bit like the pay stuff. You know, how many days did I have at the start of the year? What have I taken? What have I booked? What have I got left? Now, obviously, I'm towards the end of the year, so there's not a lot remaining, but as it goes through the year, they see all of that information. Whether you're doing it through requesting or whether you're booking it manually as managers, it's still going to display the same information, because it's about their holiday account and those bookings. And then at the bottom, because I've got some requests enabled in self-service, it's just showing me the most recent requests that I made and what the current status of those requests is. Now, this is the home screen. Obviously, it will change slightly based on the sorts of things that you want to display to people. You do not have to use self-service at all if you don't want to, but there are big benefits to using it, even if you're just showing them the hours that are being calculated and showing them their annual leave. Even if you manage annual leave manually outside of self-service, there's still a huge benefit to being, showing them the information that's stored against them. Now, I'm accessing this from my PC via a browser. If you access this from a mobile phone, it will just resize. So this is not a me thing. This is Google Chrome. So if I go to developer tools and put it into mobile mode, and you can do this for any website, it will show you what it will look like on an iPhone SE. If I want to see what it looks like on an iPhone 12, that's what it'll look like on an iPhone 12 or a Samsung Galaxy S8. So you can see that when the system knows, when the website knows it's not running on a desktop, it will resize accordingly based on the device that's being used. So they get all the same functionality, no loss of use whatsoever. It just changes the view ever so slightly. So is there any questions on the home page before we go and look at a couple of other features? I'm guessing you would have put your hand up if you did, so that's fine. So moving on, They can look at their work calendar. So this is the rota for them. So whatever you want to call it, the shift pattern, the rota, the roster, their work calendar, it's entirely up to you. But this is going to display whatever is planned for that person. So the shifts that are planned, any annual leaves that are booked, any adjustments that have been made. So you can see there's some extra time that's been authorized. So it's giving them an overview of what's going on. And they can click on any day and they can get a little audit. It will say, you know, what the shift they were on, were there any authorizations, who did it, when did they come, when did they go, you know, were there any open shifts, any requests, and so on. And they can do that for any day in the system. This calendar can also be synchronized externally from self-service. So for example, if you made a change to someone's shift in the system, which you can do, it can send them a notification saying that shift has been updated. They can get that notification in here as a self-service message. They can get it as an email. They can even get it as an SMS. So obviously they might come in and take a look. Or if you are using the iCalendar link, then they can just look at an external calendar. This is exactly the same information. I'm just showing it in the calendar app on my Mac. Now, this could be Outlook, Gmail, Yahoo Mail, whatever you like. Any of those internet-based calendars, they can link to their work account so they can see what is going on. Other calendars that people tend to look at are things like their clockings, of course. And you can see there where that missed clocking is. And again, from the system, if you want, you can allow them to make a request for a missed clocking. So they can say, oh, I forgot to clock out. I should have finished at 5. That can come across as a request. You accept the request. It puts the insert in and it recalculates. Now, of course, you can put clockings in manually as well as managers, but it's how much of it you want to push down to the employees to make the whole process much more slick. And you can go backwards and forwards with months and years in all of these different calendars. They can look at a calendar of their requests. They can look at those open shifts that have been broadcast. And there's something that's similar. It's something called availability. So this, again, this is an advanced feature from what's in Vanquish. So this is where people can go in and they can actually say when they are available to do extra. Now, this might be your full-time staff on their rest days. It could be people you've got on 0 hours. It could be part-time staff. Again, it's a permission thing. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. If you want to use it, you can enable it just for the people that you want to use it for. And these things are all configurable. You know, the name, the color are all things that you can decide upon. What this actually means is that when we go and look at a manager view, we will see the rota for everybody. We'll also see the people that said they're available. So you get an overview of everything from an operational point of view that's going on. With the requests themselves, if you are going to enable any type of requesting in the system, the list of requests is entirely up to you to decide. There is no default. You know, you might have 20 reasons in the system for a manager to pick from, but you might choose just to put a subset of those into self-service. You know, book annual leave, company business. Again, these are just my examples, but it doesn't just have to be things about booking time off. You can use the system for claiming for things. So it may be you need to claim an on-call. You might have an engineer's call out. You might have, I need to claim some additional hours. Whatever the reasons are, think of the processes that you do to get people paid, the things that you're doing to affect their pay, whether they're in Vanquish or not. Could it be something you could put in self-service? Now, again, like the whole system, you do not have to do this from day one. If you think just having the home screen and the calendar view is useful, great. If a month or 2 or 3 down the road, you think, do you know what? Let's introduce annual leave requests. You could just turn on annual leave requests. And then as you're comfortable with people using the system effectively, you can start turning on more bits. You can also, if you want, turn on a team view. So this is the only time they see something about their colleagues. So you can see what's going on in the department or the location, depending on how you set this up. And you can see if anybody is off, but it only says absence. It doesn't display the reason that a person is off in self-service. Obviously, it does for a manager. But the other reason people use this is if you do anything like shift swapping. And I know some of you will and some of you won't, but you can see the shifts that other people are working. And one of the request processes you can do in here is you can send requests to colleagues and say, will you do a swap with me? And if and only if that person says yes, it can then create a mutual request to go to the manager to say, these 2 people want to do a swap, will you allow it? So managers are only going to get involved when there's a mutual request rather than just a one-sided thing. So again, these are all things you can think to use in the future, things that don't exist today in Vanquish, and takes it a little bit further than what you've got in terms of just being pure time and attendance and shift management. So that's a very, if you like, whistle-stop tour of self-service. There is a bit more in self-service than what I've shown you, but generally it's, the takeaways are share information about what you're going to pay them for, share information about their annual leave. They're the two things most people are interested in. If you're a client that's already doing annual leave in an HR system, we very often sit in the middle of HR and payroll. Then if you've already got, for example, an HR system where you do all your leave booking, that's fine. We can integrate with that HR system and we can receive not only the people details to set the people up automatically, we can also receive the absence details and we can update the roster with those absence details, whether it's annual leave, sickness, whatever those reasons are, we can consume that data and update the system so you're not managing it twice. Alternatively, and a large portion of customers do this, you might want to manage absences in here and then push those absences back to HR. And obviously the calculations from absences push to payroll. So you don't have to make decisions today or any time in the future about where you want to do certain things. We're quite comfortable managing absences in our system. We're quite comfortable people managing absences in HR, and we receive those absences. Ultimately, we need to know about absences because it affects a roster, it affects the calculations that we do, therefore it affects the outputs that we send to payroll. And what we're trying to do really is manage by exception, get you to do the minimum amount of work possible, and at the end of the period produce a pay file that gets people paid accurately. So is there any questions on the self-service before we go and look at the manager view of things?
No questions, Rob.
Excellent, thanks for that. Right, if no one asks any questions, we might be done quickly, so that'd be nice. It's nearly Christmas. So I'm going to switch and log in as a manager. And as I said before, the permissions you've got are entirely down to you. So I'm logging in as a manager that looks after that group of people that we saw. I've also got additional responsibilities in the system where I can do configuration and I can do other things. And then that is not going to be typical for most managers. When I log into the system, I have a dashboard. We can put a picture in the background. This is just my default one. And we've got these tiles, which you can move around and you can change the way this looks. But it's telling you, as a user, the things that you should be interested in. I've got a number of exceptions. If I click on the tile, it says when they're for, the type of exception message, the category of exception, who that exception's for. Now, this type of screen where we've got columns, again, based on your permissions, you can move things around. So if you said, actually, I really want the employee name over on the left, then you can move it on the left. If you said, actually, it'd be really useful to know what department they're in, then you could turn on department information. You can sort things, you can change the views. So if you said, I'm only interested in that department, you could filter by things, and you can save these views by whatever you want to, whether it's by this view, whether it's by the category of exception. As you all know, as users, exceptions, or in Vanquish, people often call it doing corrections. Exceptions are things that haven't gone to plan. So in this case, I've got some overtime that's been worked and I need to authorize it potentially. I've got people that have worked on a rest day, which might still be overtime, but I'm highlighting it as a different type of event. I've got people that didn't clock out after they clocked in. I've got people that have got some unauthorized absence. All of these things are based on your conditional rules. So, for example, something like an overtime exception is only going to get raised in the system when you want it to be. What that means is, I don't need you to answer this question, it's hypothetical, but at the end of a shift, what would be the minimum overtime you'd normally pay someone? And it's usually 15 minutes or 30 minutes. So what we can do is have a rule in the system that says when someone clocks out 15 minutes or more after the end of the shift, raise an exception because a manager needs to make a decision. Are they authorizing that or not? Now, obviously, you can have the rules set on your own rules and you can have multiple. So it may be, in one location in Mansfield, the rule is 15 minutes. It may be that the supervisor in charge doesn't get overtime. So we don't raise an exception for those. It might be you've got a second location and for whatever reason, their rule is 30 minutes. Or it could be based on a job role or an old contract. So we build these things in the system, and that's where it starts to change and depart from what Vanquish does. In Vanquish, So anyone that's ever administered Vanquish will know that when you build a shift in Vanquish, the rules live on the shift. What's the earliest possible start time? What's the latest possible start time? When could the break be? Earliest finish, latest finish, overtime rates, all sits on the shift. And what that means is that you're constrained by that shift. If you need a new shift, you need to set all those things up. If you've got different contract rules, different people, terms and conditions, you need to have copies of the same shift but with different rules attached, and you need to make sure you use the right shift in the right pattern for the right people. In Imperago, it's quite different. A shift is a start time and an end time. And all of the rules are separate. The rules belong to the people. And what that means is that if you've got a 9 till 5 shift or an 8 till 4 shift, you've only got one. And it doesn't matter who works it, the system will apply the rules that belong to that person for the shift that they're working. So what that means is, if some people get paid premium, some people don't get paid premium, unsocial hours, the system will know that based on the rules, and it will do what it needs to do. Same with exceptions. It's only going to raise exceptions when it needs to, based on the condition for that person. So it means managing a system is a whole lot easier. You're only going to manage by exception when the system says there's an exception for you to manage. Now, you can authorize from there, you can drill down, you go and look at a person's time account, all of that type of thing. Staff plan. Now, the system's in real time. So we know the time now is 10:27. It knows how many people that I'm responsible for should be working. I've got 2 people planned on annual leave, and I've got a bunch of inactive people. Inactive means their shift is finished, or they're not working today, or they've got a shift that starts later. And if I click on this tile, it takes me to an overview of the rota or the roster or the working pattern, whatever you call it in your terminology. But this is effectively the people that I have responsibility for and what is planned for them for the 11 days that I'm looking at. And you can change the number of days, you can change the calendars, you can go and look around. And the color schemes are up to you. The activity or type of shift is up to you as well. The important thing is the times that they're working. But this is just a quick overview of what's going on, a snapshot. We can manage it and change it elsewhere. Next to that is the staff actual. So this is telling me right now what is actually happening. And for, I think all of you, you've got people clocking in and clocking out. So when you do have people providing times at the start and end of a shift or breaks, you get the added benefit of knowing if a person's absent, because it knows they should be at work. And we now know out of those 12 people, only 11 have arrived and 1 person is deemed absent without reason. And if we click on it, it will take us to the status page. And this is a screen that can update in, or actually I won't say real time, updates every 20 seconds, goes and looks for the latest clocking information and gives you up-to-date information about what's going on. Again, it's a grid screen so you can move things around. I typically have mine like this, red, amber, green on the left, names, times, in or out, the shift they should be working. I think it's useful to show any exceptions and requests that these people might have. But if you're not interested in that, you can turn those bits off. You might leave it just like that. Again, it's up to you to decide how you want to interact and use these screens. But it's going to give me that real-time information. Now, it may be, Jake should have been in at 6:30 and he's not in. Or it may be he is in and he's forgotten to clock. But immediately that shift starts, if they are not present, it will go red. If they then turn up late, it will go green because they have arrived. But what you want to do with that lateness is obviously up to you in terms of the rules and the configuration that you want to set in the system. If they're a minute late, do you care? There you go. It just flickered. That was it going away and getting the latest information. Now, mine's clearly not going to change because it's a demonstration system, but in the real world, people will be arriving and leaving and providing those clock-ins. So yeah, if a person arrives late, they'll go green. What you want to do with that lateness is up to you. If it's a minute, does it matter? If it's 5 minutes, do you need an exception? Do you want to round it up? Do you want to round it down? At the end of the week, does it affect their overtime? All those sorts of things you can build in the system. So if, like I said, again, you are just managing by exception. If you've got responsibility for multiple teams, multiple locations or departments, rather than looking at this as one tile, you could break it down. Now, you're only going to see options over here based on the things that your peoples are members of. Now, you're going to have much more imaginative naming conventions than I've got. Example, location 1, 2, 3, 4. It'd be your locations or your department names. But if I just pick those ones, for example, you can see there now that I've got the same information, but I've got it broken down by location or broken down by department. And it's just a personal preference. You know, if you have got responsibility across multiple departments or organizations, it might be useful to do that, or you might be comfortable just seeing everything in a single tile. And each time you click on those, it drills down to that status page. Next to that is my requests. So these are the if you are doing requesting, this is where the request would show on the tile. And if you click on the tile, it'll take you to the requests that you've got. Now, I've got a bunch of them in there. Again, I can move things around, turn bits on and off that I find useful. You know, if you want to, it's really simple process. If you want to accept a request, click on the tick, put a message in if you want to. And if you accept it, multiple things will happen at once. It will book it, it will update the roster. In this case, it was an annual leave, so it's going to make a deduction from their balance. It's going to send them a confirmation saying it's been, you know, it's been accepted and it's happened. So all of that happens instantaneously. If you want to reject it, you click on the red cross and it will send them a message saying it's been declined, and it won't do all the things I just said because I'm not accepting it. If, for example, you're doing a claim for something like claiming additional hours, claiming an on-call, obviously it's not going to make a booking as such, but it will make an adjustment against the requisite code, which then goes on to the end of period and out to payroll. So same process, still tells them it's happened, but there's no change to their roster in that event. All of these options I've got to along here so far, you can get to from up here as well. It's just whatever you think is more convenient. Most people, when they come in, click on the tiles because it's obvious. Once you're in certain screens, rather than coming back, a lot of people use these shortcuts to go to the same. If I went to requests, that's the same request screen that we've just been at already. It's just a different way of getting there. And then the last one I've got over here is, and I'm not sure if any of you are responsible for doing the payroll side of things, but there's an additional step in Imperago where at the end of a period, and you've checked your numbers and you might have run some reports before you run your payroll extract, and 99% of customers are running payroll extracts out of the system, there is a process where you need to sign that time off. Now, who you give that responsibility is up to you. So it might be you give it to a department manager, or it may be that you manage these things centrally and it's still with payroll. That's up to you to decide. But what this is telling me over here as a person that needs to do that is that my next cutoff is Monday at 10 o'clock. And I've got an overdue one, which is why it's in red. And I've always got an overdue one because then I've got one to talk about. And if I click on it, it takes me to my approvals page. So this is my sign off. And what we're looking at here for all of these people are the codes that will get sent to payroll. So not the pay element names, because most people don't understand pay element names. It's still the code in the system. But obviously these are just my codes. These would be your codes. And what this is doing is it's looking at the daily values and it's summarizing all those daily values into totals for the period. Now, mine is a weekly payroll. If yours is weekly, that's fine. It can be 4 weekly, monthly. It can be irregular periods. As long as you can define when your end of periods are, then the system can manage that. But what we're looking to do is look at all those daily values, total them all up. And we don't stop there. You can go further than that. You can say, okay, I've totaled up all their standard hours. I've now totaled up their basic hours. Actually, they're short on their standard hours because they had an unexplained absence. You can start doing things like clawback. You know, do I need to claw back from overtime to make up the standard hours? You know, have they had a period with no absences? Is there an attendance bonus that needs to be paid? Those sorts of things can be captured in your rules, run automatically, and then presented in here as what you are going to sign off. Now, I appreciate you've not seen the daily outputs yet, but I'm just going through what these tiles do, and I won't sign it off. I'll come back to it. But effectively, that's what we're looking at. But it also highlights if any of these people have got outstanding exceptions. Those exceptions need to be cleared before you do your approvals. It will stop you approving if people have got exceptions. And as you know from experience, most exceptions or corrections are going to be pay affecting. It's something that needs to be resolved. Now, again, I could have got to that screen from up here, payroll approval. It would take me to the same screen. So let's take a quick look at where we get all those daily values from, the time and attendance side of things. So going into Andy, because it goes into the first person automatically. Again, this is a grid screen. You can move things around. You can turn bits on and off. I've put these codes together. These are just codes in my system. I've selected from the list of available codes the ones I want to see, and I've saved that view and called it manager's view. And this is what I decided to look at. It's useful for me as a manager to see standard hours, extra hours, premium hours, total hours, and any exceptions that might be outstanding for each person. So I've got my date, I've got my shift, I've got my clockings, any bookings, and I've got these automatic values that are calculated. So what the system's doing is looking at the shift, looking at the clock-ins, just like it does in Vanquish, and calculating the values. But it's doing it in a much cleverer way than what Vanquish is doing, because it's applying all the rules that apply to people automatically rather than just to shift information. So if you want to go to a different person, you can use the previous button, or you can use the next button, or you can just type a person's name or part of their number in and it will find them, and you can go to that person's record. So picking on Faye again, we can see that she's got that overtime exception. No, I could have cleared it from the overtime screen, or I can choose to clear it from here. It may be I don't want to pay that overtime. It may be I just want to say, no, I want to acknowledge it. It's important that we either acknowledge it and say I'm not doing anything with it, or we authorize it. If we don't do either, it won't be cleared and we won't be able to do that approval. So what we're trying to do is get you to a point where your payroll is reliable. For it to be reliable, we need to run the rules. We need people to clear the exceptions and acknowledge them. So if I wanted to authorize it, I might just have one reason called authorized overtime. Again, these things are configurable, and the system will automatically go away and know, based on the conditions, based on the day, based on the time of day, what it needs to do with that time. Does it need to be rounded up? Did it need to be rounded down? Is she entitled to a different code? As users, you don't need to know that information because that's all been defined and captured and is sitting there as a rule that runs for this person. So that's automatically put it down to that 30 minutes. If I delete that authorization out, the system will raise that exception again. So everything you do as a user can create a calculation. So you're always going to be up to date. You're not relying on scheduled calculations picking up this information. If I went in and I changed her clocking time to 28 minutes, then the exception disappears. And that's because in my system, I've set it up that the trigger point is 30 minutes or more. So at 28 minutes, the system doesn't raise an exception. So you can see you're only going to get work to do, things to manage when it meets the conditions that you've set. So it's not up to us, it's up to you to say these are the rules. And then, within reason, you need to make a decision about certain things and then authorize it. If I was to change that back to a different time again, obviously all these things are audited that someone's been messing around with the clock-ins. She's now got 31 minutes. If I was to authorize that overtime again, then in this case it's still only going to give her 30 minutes because I've got it rounding down to 30 minutes. It could be rounding up, it could be rounding to nearest. You could be splitting overtime based on the amount of overtime people have worked. Again, as a user, you don't need to worry about that. You're just saying yes, no, this is what I want. Now again, I'm going to delete it one more time and I'm going to change it back to 29 minutes or 28 minutes, but less than 30. Let's do 27 for a change. Nothing happens. We can see that she stayed for 27 minutes, but we can still capture that time. From the moment someone arrives to the moment they leave, you can capture the time and put it against a code. And rather than having everything turned on in one screen, I've got a different view, which I've called other time. And in there, I've captured that they arrived a little bit early, but it wasn't enough to be overtime. Or they arrived a little bit late and I called it start grace. Or they left a bit early. Or in this case, she stayed for 27 minutes and I called it departure time. You can call it what you like. These are fairly standard terms that people generally stick to, but you call it what you like. Call it thanks for turning up, see you tomorrow time if you want. But 27 minutes ordinarily in my system isn't enough to generate an overtime exception. Now, it may be you said, can you stay on or make sure you get 30 minutes? And they clocked out after 27. Now, there's no exception. So that's not going to get picked up because the rule is 30 minutes. Now, you could, from here, provided you've got the authority to do this, again, it's a permission thing, you could say, I want to deduct it from one balance, I wanted to add it to another balance. Or you could just go straight into an overtime code and you could say, actually, on this day, I need to make sure she gets 30 minutes. And you could do a manual override because, sometimes the rules don't apply. Stayed to help. paid 30 mins. And that would be a manual override by a user, and it would put that 30 minutes into the requisite code, which would then go on to the end of period calculations, get summed up and appear in that payroll approval page. So what we're really doing is trying to remove work from you, only managed by exception, but still having the ability to override the system should you need to, and provided you've got the permission to as a user. If you're sitting there with your head in your hands thinking, oh God, I don't want people doing this, you don't have to give them permission to be able to do manual overrides. It may be something that you reserve as a payroll or an HR feature. And if an override's needed, then a team leader says, oh, I need you to do a manual adjustment for Faye because she stayed on. It's up to you to decide who you want to give these permissions and privileges to. Other things you can turn on in here, you can turn on like their job role, you can turn on things like, their annual leave information. You can turn on lots of other stuff in this screen. It's up to you, with our assistance, of course, to decide what are the things that you think are going to be useful for you to use and see in the system. And again, you can look at calendar controls, you can move around in the system, you can look at a number of different days if you want to. And if I go back a period, 1 week, you'll see that this section here is all grayed out. And where I was in here changing clocking times, I can't do that up here. I can't do anything. It is all locked down. And that is because that is a period that has been approved. Once it's approved, it locks it down. That then means that your payroll extract is going to be safe. No one can make any more changes to that data. Now, obviously, sometimes people miss things or you make mistakes. You can unapprove. Again, it's a permission thing. You can decide who can unapprove, who can't. You can unapprove just one person if you want. They can make a change and then you can reapprove it. But it does need to be approved before you run your payroll extract. If I went back to my payroll approval, it would just be a simple case of going select all, perform actions, and letting the system lock it down. But obviously, I've got some outstanding exceptions. And it's reminding me that these people have got outstanding exceptions. So we're doing as much as we can, not to make it completely foolproof, but to keep reminding people there's things that you need to do. I've got it set that I can ignore these exceptions. Ordinarily, people that are approving wouldn't be able to approve people with exceptions. So I could lock that down and it would go away and approve those people. And they've disappeared because I'm choosing not to look at approved records. Now they're all approved. And if I went back to that history screen, you would see that this period is also locked down and I can't make any more changes. What that means is that when you're done with this and you've run some reports and you've locked it down, producing payroll is if you like, the simplest part of the process, because you just come up and you go payroll, extract, you pick the group that you want to extract and you click run. And what the system will do is it will go away and it will look for everybody in this pay group. It will look for all the approved records and it will create the payroll file for you in the format you need with those codes mapped to your payroll elements. Now, obviously, most people can't do this. It's going to be reserved for a few people in the organization. Similarly, this is where we've got things like, what do we call it in the system? What is the pay element we map it to? How do we create the file? What is the format of the file? What is the content of that file? Most people never ever see this. It's usually something we set up at the start of a project, unless you've got new pay elements introduced into your organization or you're changing your payroll provider, then you'd probably never come back to it for a couple of years or more. But it's the sort of thing that we set up with you as part of the project so that you can just be up and running as quickly as possible and being live using the system. What that then does, obviously, in this case, is produces a CSV file with all that pay information in that you can then load into payroll, or if you're using an external payroll bureau, you can send them that information so that they can process that pay for you. Now, all this time, we've just been looking at requests, approvals. You see the overdue one's now gone because I've approved it. We looked at a view of the rota. We looked at the time and attendance data. And to some effect, it's true, you can come in here and you can make changes to people's shifts in here. If you wanted them working a different shift, you could just put a different start time in. As simple as that. You don't need to go and build a shift. You can just put times in because the rules are separate from the times. You don't need to put all that stuff that you've got in Vanquish into a shift. So it makes it, as you can see, much, much simpler to manage going forwards. If you want to manage the rota rather than just looking at it, then we have the rostering function. Now, coming in here, I'm looking at 7 days. I could look at 11 days if I want, like the previous screen. So it's very similar to that view. The difference is in here is we can start making changes. We can do an awful lot more in here should we want to. It may be you just look at it like that and that's wonderful and that's all you ever want to look at. I'm going to put it back to 7 days just because I'm going to turn on a couple of other things and it'll make more sense. If you said, actually, I'm not interested in the times they work, I just want to look at the type of shift, you could turn off the time and just look at the type of shift. Or it could be you're only interested in the time and not the type of shift. So as an individual user or as an organization, you can decide how you want to use and consume this data. Now, it may be you don't want to look at everybody. This is everybody you're responsible for. You just want to look at people that are working the earlies. So you can start creating filters. So, I mean, this isn't a massive list of people, but if you've got a whole bunch of people that you're responsible for, it can be a bit overwhelming. So you can create your own views and you can say, actually, I only want to look at people doing earlies. And you can create these things yourself. You can go and create these. They're very, very easy to do. I just want to look at people. I'm going to get rid of any empty rows. So that's just people that are working early spares or morning shifts. Or it may be, I only want to look at people that work in a particular department or location. And again, you could do it like that. Or people with a particular job role. Or a combination of those things. I just want to look at people in this location with this job role or in this location on earlies, or I just want to look at earlies across multiple locations. Or it could be even be skill based. I just want to look at people with a particular skill. So you can see that you can start reducing the amount of things you're trying to look at rather than looking at everything all at once. And it just makes it much, much easier to use. You can also see in there those availabilities that people have set if you are using those availabilities. If you're not using availabilities, then obviously it's just going to look a bit like that because you'll never see them. So this is fairly typical. I've got this in what we call simple mode. Simple mode means that the shift, a bit like if you're doing this in an Excel spreadsheet, the shift fills up the whole day. No matter when it starts or ends, it fills up the whole calendar day. The alternative to this is what we call standard view, and it really does depend on the type of organization and the user, what they prefer. It makes no difference. And in standard view, what we've got is the position of the shift and the length of the shift is relevant to the day. So you can see that an early shift starts before an afternoon shift, which starts before a night shift that spans 2 days. And a longer shift, a 12-hour shift, is physically longer than a shorter shift. It makes no difference to how the system works. It's just personal preference. There are some advantages to using it in this view. If you come down to an individual day, you can get an hour-by-hour overview of what's going on in your organization. Whereas if you did that in simple mode, it's not actually that effective because everything fills up a whole day. But essentially, it's the same thing. It's just down to personal preference. I typically start in this view because it's easier for people to view. If I come straight into this view, people's eyes are darting everywhere trying to understand what they're looking at. But it really makes no difference. You can see that the public holidays are highlighted. You can put public holiday rules into the system. You can maintain your own public holiday calendars. So if a person's working on a public holiday, the system automatically knows that and it might give them a premium and pay slightly differently. So again, those sorts of things you can build into the system as well. So this is just a rota view at the moment. Now, these shifts likely came from shift patterns, and you can build as many weird and wonderful shift patterns as you like in your system. You know, I've got a 12-week pattern here that I did for a company that's got train drivers. I've got a 3-week rotating shift. They don't have to be in 7 days. I've got a 4 on 4 off, which is a period of 8 days. You can build any number of different types of patterns as you like. And when you come to put patterns on people, let's pick one that's a bit more interesting. It will graphically display, for example, let's say they want to start on the 31st. I don't want them starting on the early. I want them starting on the day. You just click where you want them to start that pattern. And it will know that that's day 8 in the pattern. It knows that that's day 11 in the pattern. And if you start on that day on this shift, it's going to do 2 days. Then they get 2 days off and they'll go straight into their lates and they'll keep rotating around because I haven't put an end date in. If I put an end date in, it will run to the end date and then cease, obviously. But all that's going to do, as you likely know already, is give them a series of shifts that they're expected to work. And that's when we start to depart from what you've got in Vanquish. In Vanquish, if you're on a pattern, you're on a pattern. And if you do something different, then you have to deal with it through corrections. If, say, for example, you wanted someone, they're on the 11 till 7, you want them working 10 till 6, they would clock early in the morning, you'd get an exception for that. They'd clock out early for the end of the shift, you'd get a correction for that, and you'd need to deal with it through corrections. What you can do in here, if you know you want someone doing something different, is you can simply come in and you can change the start time, you can change the end time, and you can click save. And on that one day only, they're now working a 10 till 6. And if they turn up at 10 and finish at 6, around the parameters that you've set about arrivals and departures and overtimes, then that's it. It's dealt with. There's going to be nothing to deal with. It's just going to go, oh, they arrived at 10, they left at 6, everyone's happy. If they arrive early, it might raise an exception. If they're late, if they stay on for overtime, then it's going to raise an exception based on your rules. So you've got the, if you like, the flexibility to build patterns that people work, but also update things to meet your operational needs. So you could do that. It isn't just a case of changing the start time and the end time. You could put them on a different type of activity. Now, I've got simple things like days, earlies, lates, and nights, but in actual fact, an activity can be whatever you want it to be. It could be production 1, production 2, picking, packing, dispatch, office, working from home. It's up to you to decide what your list of activities are. As you see, I've got one down there called Smile. I've got one called No Activity. It's whatever you want it to be in terms of being able to display to staff what they're doing, but also for you to be able to look at this and start creating different views, but also reporting. So when you run reports out of the system, you could say, show me all the hours worked on this activity, rather than just show me all the hours. So it does have a greater benefit than just being a simple shift. You can do shifts for multiple people. You can put patterns on multiple people. So if you like, this is kind of going a little bit further than what you've got with the Vanquish system. Over here on the left, obviously you've got their names. If you click on their name, it takes you into their TNA record where we had all of those hours. If you hover over their contact card, it pops up with their contact details, says whether they're in, whether they're out, whether they're on shift. And you've got some shortcuts to other places in the system as well. So again, useful things in the system. So that's kind of regular stuff. You can go a stage further than that. You can start doing things like planned and contracted hours. Again, it's going to be relevant to some people and not others. If you've got very fixed working patterns, it might not be needed. If you are quite dynamic in the way that people work, it could be useful to see what their contract is against what you've planned. If you've got it in blue, it means you've planned them for greater than what their contract is, which isn't a problem. It just means they're probably going to end up with some overtime. And if it's red, it means they haven't been planned enough according to what their contract is. It may be you've made an error, you've cancelled a shift, you've shortened their shift without realizing. And there's other columns that you can turn on and you can sort and you can save different views of that as well. So it's really there just as an aid to help you understand what's going on. So beyond all of this, and when I was in standard in the standard view, there was some other information up the top, which some of you might have seen. So going beyond TNA and managing shifts, Imperago gives you the ability to start managing budgets as well. So you can, if I turn on the information, you can store budgets in the system and you can start predicting labor costs as well. So what the system can do is it can hold a rate against a person. So we're not calculating payroll, we're using the rate for forecasting. So we can hold a rate against a person, and using your time and attendance records or rules, we can start predicting the cost of a shift, including things like premium time, overtime, paid breaks, unpaid breaks. Public holidays are more expensive than a standard day, all those sorts of things. We can start predicting those costs. And the figure on the left is telling you what your predicted cost is for this 7 days for your people against your budget for the same period. So it's giving you foresight of where you are in terms of labor planning. You don't need to come in here to see costs. You can run reports on it. And again, if you don't want people to see costs, you don't give them permission to see costs. So it's just really highlighting that beyond what you're used to. There is more information. There are many more things you can be using this system to help you manage the organization with. You can have multiple budgets. So I've got a budget for everyone. I've got one for staff only, and I've gone over. So it's highlighting my budget in red because I've gone over the budget for staff. But I've also got a budget for agency, which I haven't used, which is why for everybody, I am still slightly under budget. Again, you can just have one budget if you want. I've got 3 in there just to demonstrate that you can. And you can, if you put more days in there, so if I put 28 days in there, then it will just show more than my 7, and it gives me the budget information for that. That's when colors can become really useful looking at things in the system. If you don't want to look at all 28, you can use your little slide bar at the top to look at less days. But the values up here are still based on the 28 days that you've loaded in the first place. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that unless people have got questions at the end, because I know it's quite a departure of what you've got, but I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't at least explain to you there's more beyond what you've got today. So in a nutshell, with the rostering side of things, you can build patterns, you can put people on patterns, but you've got the ability to make changes ad hoc if you need to. You can do an awful lot more than that. You can do costing, budgeting, looking at the hours they've got planned as well. So I'm not going to do any more on that. I'm going to come back to the home screen, and I'm just going to explain a couple of other things that are in the system. So we do have features like delegation. So if you know someone's going to be off, you can delegate the responsibilities to someone else, or you can give a user responsibility to delegate to someone else if they know they're going to be off. So it doesn't mean that it's always going to end up on the admin team's heads to get this done. You could devolve the responsibility to someone else. Of course, there's a ton of reports in the system. In the reports, there's a number of different types of report. You might not use all of them. Again, you control these through permissions. Not everybody needs to see every type of report. And in these reports, you can pick a type, and you can put content in it, and you can save it. You can use the same type multiple times to create multiple different types of report. When you've done that, it will appear in the drop-down list with the description it was given. And if you click on it, annual leave one, for example, it will go away and it will come back to screen. It will give you all the information that you asked for in that report. So this is showing me what everybody had at the start of the year, what they've carried forward, any adjustments, what they've got remaining at the end of the year. So it's a very simple annual leave report. But you've got reports about absences and hours and all sorts of things in the system. You can also click on manage reports, and it will give you the same list of saved reports that you've got access to. And if you click on the first option, it runs to screen like we've just seen, or you can download it, or you can email it to yourself in different formats. So it makes it much, much easier than always just running it to screen. You just say, actually, I just want to run it to Excel. I just want to download it, and it'll go away and it run, and it's downloaded that report, and it's put it into Excel immediately, and you can carry on doing what you was doing. You can also copy reports, which at the start of a project in the first year is really, really useful, because quite often you'll come up with a weekly report and then someone says, oh, that'd be great as a 4-weekly report. Oh, do you know that 4-weekly report? That'd be great as a quarterly report. So you can just copy them, change the date range, change the name, and you've created another report very, very easily and very quickly. You can also share reports with other people as well to save them having to create all their own reports. And then lastly, with reports, what you can do is you can schedule them. So when you've created a report and saved it, you can come in and you can actually schedule a report and say, from my list of available reports, I want to schedule this one, I want to schedule it. And these cycles will be things that you can build yourself. These are just my example. I want to schedule it every 4 weeks. I want it to run at 6 o'clock in the morning. Send it to me in Excel. And whether you're logged in or not, whether you're awake or not, the system's going to run this. And as soon as it's complete, which is going to be very shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning, you're going to get an email notification telling you there's this report and it's available. You can also choose to include extra people. So if it's a report that you want to share with the FD or another manager, you can put their email address in and they'll get the same notification as you. So again, what we're trying to do is remove the work out of the system. You having to look for things to manage, you having to run the reports that you want. You can start building the rules that raise the exceptions you need to clear. You can build the rules, you can build the reports and schedule those reports to come to you. So I'm probably not going to cover much more in terms of time and attendance and the rostering side of things unless there's any questions. And then Brendan's asked me to very briefly go and show you what we have in terms of the HR module, things like visitor management and roll call. So I'll just pause for a sec in case there's any questions on time and attendance, payroll export, shift management.
No questions, Rob.
Brilliant. The other reason for a pause is it lets me have a drink because I've done a lot of talking.
Yeah,
So,
if I could just give a quick brief few words here. What you've got the core system here, and then sat around this, you've got the additional services, as Rob mentioned there, visitor management, HR module, real-time roll call and services, which we're going to just give you a quick overview of. Some of you already have face scanners that work on the system. Sharon, I'll speak to you about your face scanner coming to you. So you can use face scanners with both systems, so it's backwards compatible if you already have them and you're using them with Vanquish. So you can just start using them with this system. So Rob's going to give you a quick few minutes on the additional service.
Actually, that's a really important thing that Brendan's just said, not just for Sharon. So, you know, if you've got some of the more modern terminals that are already pushing information into everyone cloud, which you might have heard of, then absolutely you can carry on using those. You haven't got to re-implement that. Similarly, we can get some of the data out of Vanquish. So it's if I said, oh, you press a button and it all magically happens, I'd be lying. It's not that simple. You know, they're very different systems, but obviously they're both our systems. So we've got some tools that we've written that allows us to extract some data out of Vanquish to make the transition easier. We're working on it constantly. You know, we're always improving it, trying to find up with, you know, more things that we can do to improve that process. Similarly, with the system that we're looking at as a whole, you know, it's a cloud system. We're constantly developing it. We aim to do 2 to 3 releases a year. Everybody gets upgraded at the same time. You know, there is only one version that is live and every client is on it. So you would never be on an old version. There is no such thing as the old version of Imperago. It's the current version that everybody's on. So I'm just going to briefly go and show you that other stuff that Brendan mentioned. So I've got a link that takes me straight through to HR and roll call. So I've got a similar background in there. I've created some tiles. You don't need to do these, but obviously I've done these to make it look pretty and show you some information. So I've got some information about my staff numbers, nationalities, gender breakdown, and obviously I'm picking that up from those staff records where those things have been set. I've got a bit of information about the roll call summary, any visitors I've got on site today through the visitor management that's available, and any visitations that are still expected. Now, the HR information, if I go and look at people, for some reason, I always pick John, and I'm going to pick John again. There's no reason for me picking John. We call these record tabs. So there's a list of tabs there, and for some reason they haven't loaded, and that is very weird. Why is that not worked? Let's pick someone else. It doesn't really matter who I pick, to be honest. There we go, records tabs. So these are records tabs. Now, you ain't got an email address, that's why it's chucked that up. So some of these tabs are system tabs, which just means they're defaults. You don't have to use them, but you can't change what's in them. Some of them are tabs that I've created, tabs that you can create as customers. So you can create your own record tabs, what they're called and what the content is in them. So this is not a full-blown HR system. We don't have things like learning management, links to job boards, succession planning, stuff like that. It is an enhanced personnel record. It's an operational HR, very similar to, I guess, what you've got in Vanquish, but it allows you to do more. So, for example, COVID vaccines is one that I invented. I made this up. I called it COVID vaccines, and I created the form that's behind it. And if I click on it, I created a date field, called it date dose given. I can drag a file or a document in here or a picture. I created a drop down list. I put some comments fields in, and it creates a record. And I've done one for return to works, which is very similar but a little bit different. I've got 2 date fields, which are called return date, interview date. Has it been conducted? Have I conducted an interview? Yes or no? And notes again. And the one that's slightly different is the one that says skills, training and qualifications, which is always a really popular one if people are using this. And that's not actually a records tab in itself. It's just a title. And the records tabs I've grouped together. I used to have these as 4 separate tabs. And then a little while ago, we introduced a feature where you can start grouping things. So I've put them under a common title because they're all kind of similar. I've got professional memberships, qualifications, training records, skills and expertise. And these are things that you can create yourself. We'll help you create them. We'll show you how to do it. And again, usually as a project, by the end of the project, you've got all the things that you want. But we want you to be able to maintain these things going forwards, not just in HR, but also in time and attendance rostering. If you can maintain it yourself, you're going to get better use of the system. And like I say, these are things that you can create yourself. If I went in there and I looked at HR records and I went to tabs, you can see these are the tabs that we've been looking at. And if I decided that return to work's the most important one, I put it at the top, I can put it at the top. I can then modify that, and you can see how I built this. I gave it a name. I dragged across these fields that are available. So for example, when I drag across a date, it pops up and says, oh, do you want to call it start date or do you want to call it something else? So you're using the building blocks to create your own records in the system. And then where do you want that? Do I want it at the top? Do I want it at the bottom? I don't actually want it at all, of course. But it means if I went back to people and I modify a person, you'll now see that return to works is now at the top because that's where I positioned it. So effectively, it's a toolkit. You can build your own record events, you can build what goes in those, and then you can use it to store that information. So think of it as all the things you've ever had on a spreadsheet, all the things you've ever had in a filing cabinet for someone, you can now put in the system and share it across both the HR rostering and the HR modules of what we're providing. Now, this is just at a person level. You might want to look at this in multiple. So I can look at HR records, and where I've done multiple for people, I've got return to works. I've got all the return to works. Now that's only for this month. Let me change the view and look at all records. I can see all the return to works that I've done. And again, that's just an example. You can create different views of these screens, different columns, and how you want to view that information. So this is the same information that we saw before, but in a summary form. And you can even add new ones from here as well. So you can click on it, it'll bring up the same information that we saw on the return to work, but with the addition of a person's name. So you don't have to go to that person's record. You know, you can just find a person, hey, I want to add it for Alan Brown. I'm going to fill it in, click save. That would add it here, obviously, but also add it into his personal record. So there's lots of different ways you can choose to use this information. You can use these views to generate reports as well. So you might have a view that looks at skills that are expiring in the next month, in the next 6 months, and you can run reports that send you that information automatically. And you can also look at calendars as well. So you can choose to look at calendars of events. So let's say return to work for all staff. It's probably blank because I haven't got any in there. It's just the way that I've created that system. But you can calendarize things as well as have them as records, and you can look at calendars of absences as well. And clearly, we can share the information between HR and time and attendance. So if you add a new person in HR, it adds them into time and attendance. Or if you want it the other way around, you add a person in time and attendance, it'll create that record in HR as well as the absences and so on, and things like return to works as well. So really just to give you a quick overview of the types of things you could be doing with the HR. We can also do document storage. So you can go a stage further and you can store documents against people, and you can push documents out to people for people to review and say they've reviewed it, and you can see that they've reviewed it and accepted that document. And then, as I said, when I first came in, it's also things like roll call. So any of those that aren't using roll call, there is a roll call service available with Imperago and with E1C, which means when people are clocking in and out, you can put them onto a real-time roll call, including visitors. And it will say, you know, in this case, I've sorted it by department, but it might be by device. And you've got things like, you know, who are those people? You know, are they in? Are they out? I've got it sorted by department. This is online. You can go a stage further if you want, and you can have it linked to your Fire panel, and it can send out an automatic email with the same roll call information in it. So it's giving you, if you're like trying to bring everything together in one solution around people. You know, are they in? Are they out? Are we paying them? Are we not paying them? Are they a visitor? Are they not a visitor? We're trying to bring all that information into one place that is accessible to you to do what you need to do with it. Now, I mentioned visitors. I've got some planned visits. I've got some people that have arrived already. And as Brendan said, we do have a visitor module where you can, and I'm just conscious of time, I'm not going to go and show it, where you can run it on a tablet or a PC, and some of you may have used this already, but it's effectively replacing those paper books where you can create your own process of checks and balances when people arrive. And then when they do arrive, they get added to the roll call. Their host gets notified that that person is present. And then from a roll call point of view, you know, they're going to be on the roll call with your own staff. So I know there's an awful lot we've gone through. Please bear in mind in an hour or so, we've gone through an enormous amount of what the system provides. I can't imagine, some of you might want to use all of it. That'd be wonderful. Most people don't use everything that we provide. But just bear in mind that in any given day or week, you're probably not going to look at everything I've just shown you. So it's just really to give you that overview of what's available, highlight how different it is to Vanquish in terms of the way you use it, but actually it's trying to achieve the same thing. We're looking at shifts, we're looking at clockings, we're getting people paid at the end of the period. So I'm just going to go back to that, and I'm going to stop sharing. I'll wait to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks for. I've got one there from Marina in a showing. She just wanted to see if we have a, you know, when you export a report to Excel.
Oh yeah, I did that one earlier, didn't I?
You did that, Marina. Just to let you know as well, Marina, we do have a lot of customers are using an export into a payroll spreadsheet, if that's why you're asking, and you can format these as you want, but a standard export, Rob, do you want to just show us?
Oh yeah, that one I did earlier, if I drag it up, that was just, I just picked Excel and ran it. So what it tries to do is it literally tries to export every column, every detail in the report into its own column in Excel. So that was that same report that I just ran straight to Excel. Now, obviously,
you're not showing your screen.
Oh, sorry.
If you don't mind.
That's all right. It's me being a bit dim because I forgot I'd stop sharing. Let me open it again.
If you don't mind just opening it.
That's that same one that I did earlier when I ran it and it
Right.
just opened in Excel.
Right.
But I've got one that I did for payroll the other day because I was messing around with my payroll extract. There you go. So that's me. I did a payroll extract the other day. So it was just a straightforward CSV. So person number, element code, value, date earned. So it's a really simple CSV payroll extract. But any of those reports that we're running, for example, if I went to reports,
is it for payroll that you asked the question, Marina?
It's really just for reporting. So once it's in Excel, we often put them into pivot tables. But before we can do that, we've got to convert things to numbers. We've got to unwrap. We've got to unmerge. We've got to delete all the pages in between. And there's often spacing in between, so you can't automatically filter.
Is that your current Vanquish? Your current Vanquish? Yeah,
it takes a lot of time just to tidy it up so that you can use info.
So one of the things that we do offer is reports are great, and the intention for reports in here is that they're operational things you need to review and discuss. And a lot of the times, if you want to export them and put them in pivot tables, that's great. You can do that if you want, but reports are sometimes subject to change because they are just reports. There is an additional feature in the system called the local access module. And what you can do in the local access module is that you can download out of the system the raw data in terms of people, clockings, calculated values, absences and shifts. And you can download that into a local database, typically a SQL database. And then if you're got business tools, you know, ClickSense, Power BI, things like that, once that data's out, you can do what you like with it. And it's always going to come out in the same format, and you can schedule that within your own system. So if I went into my local access module, you can see that I've said go and get the roster from the last day every 15 minutes, but I want the clockings at 4 o'clock in the morning. You can create your own schedules of the things that you're going to extract into a local database, and lots of customers are starting to use this where they're combining data with other things. It may be you want to combine working data with production data. So you drop it into a local database, you're getting your production data dropped into the same database, and then you're using your local tools to run those reports and analyze that data. But other than that, obviously, you can for any report. If I go back to manage reports, just click on the download. Let's do that was that one I did earlier. Let's do that one, actual totals by export. If I wanted to do, so you've got CSVs, they did explain what this one means. Or Excel, then that will just download. And if I run that one again, we'll see it open, and it opens like that. So you can see it tries to split things the way you want them split as a human rather than what the computer thinks it should do. But obviously that one's in hours and minutes. in some of the reports, you can choose where you've got hours. Do you want them exported as hours and minutes or hours decimal? Most people, when they're using that, would be wanting hours decimal, I'd have thought, if you're going to use that data for something else.
It's a really good point, that, Marina, because one of the restrictions of Vanquish, and other people in this meeting will probably agree, is the export of data from Vanquish into Excel, dependent on what version you're using and which report you want to run, because some of the reports we just couldn't make Excel friendly. So it's a really good point.
I'm going to change that to decimal. This is going to be a crazy test. Let's run that again. So this is the same report, but I change it to hours decimal. There you go. So it's now hours decimal instead of hours and minutes. So in all the reports where you've got hours content, you can choose hours and minutes or hours decimal. That's just one example.
Okay.
Any other questions? I just want to try and keep us to time. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think there's any further questions, Rob, which is good because it means that
I'll stop the record, and then if people want to talk again, then they can. They won't feel compelled to be quiet.